Insects are one of the most ancient creatures on Earth. They were here long before man and will probably remain after. They survived where other species were disappearing, adapting, changing, but never stopping. There were always too many of them. Countless, fast, and able to penetrate any crevice, they seemed like something insignificant, small inhabitants of the world that we considered our own. But if you look at them correctly, without human arrogance, you can understand that we lived in their world, not they in ours. We built cities, but if we left them unattended for a year, the rats, mold, and insects would return, filling all the voids. We thought we had the chaos under control, but he was always there, always waiting for the moment when we could step out of the shadows. Some of them were beautiful, dragonflies shimmering in the sunlight, butterflies with patterns as if painted with the thinnest brush, beetles shining like drops of liquid metal. But behind the beauty, there was a law, the law of survival. The ant will sacrifice itself for the sake of the colony. The spider will kill without the slightest hesitation. The mantis will devour its mate after mating. They have no doubts, no compassion, no pity. They exist because that's the way things are. And this order worked for millions of years, until those who put us one step lower in the food chain appeared. I, Ronald Macavara, can't even remember when Roy appeared. I couldn't remember it. I was born on that day. I know a lot from the stories of my mother, who unfortunately saved me, but she died of pneumonia. Roy has changed the lives of all people on Earth. He appeared in the sky like an unidentified object approaching, huge, inescapable, like a curse itself. The first telescopes detected it in the asteroid belt. Then astronomers from major observatories noticed it, and soon every news channel was talking about the same threat. It was something huge, dark, distorted by gravitational tides, and its trajectory led straight to Earth. They called him Hades because he brought death, because he had to destroy everything. People were expecting a blow, the last cataclysm in the history of mankind. But the demise of the world did not happen as predicted by scientists. When Hades passed the orbit of Mars, it suddenly split open, like a lump of sand thrown into dark water, and countless fragments burst out of its depths. Millions of pieces, small and huge, flew towards the Earth from different directions. Some entered the atmosphere, shining like shooting stars. Others flashed by, disappearing into the darkness of space. But the main blows landed on the ground. That's when the real hell began. The fall lasted a day. The first debris fell into the oceans, causing giant tsunamis that wiped coastal cities off the face of the Earth. Waves covered New York, Tokyo, Shanghai, London. Giant clouds of steam and ash rose into the air, obscuring the sun. Then came the land strikes. Paris turned into a crater, where unknown organic slime flowed through the destroyed streets. A kilometer-deep crack formed in the Himalayas, from where the first creatures began to appear weeks later. In Australia, the ground swelled and began to emit chemical fumes, killing all life for hundreds of kilometers around. Africa just disappeared under the waves of sand and dust. But the worst was yet to come. People thought they were facing a natural disaster, that it was just the effects of a meteor shower, albeit a monstrous one. They didn't know that every fragment of Hades wasn't just a stone. They were eggs. Millions, billions of eggs, brought to Earth by the fall, penetrated the soil, water, cities. A new form of life was maturing in them, and when they hatched, the world finally turned into a slaughterhouse. I still can't understand how my mother was able to survive in that chaos. She was a simple woman. She worked at an old fish factory in Alaska, and that's probably what saved her. The first nests of the swarm appeared in the impact sites, in warm latitudes, where the larvae could develop rapidly, turning into soldiers, hunters, queens. They spread out, scattered, devoured all living things. Where it was warm, where there was heat or high humidity, where it was possible to multiply quickly, their feast began. When communications with the South were completely cut off on the third day of the invasion, when only static remained on TV screens and radars, when the last satellite signals transmitted images of cities teeming with dark masses, we realized that we were losing the planet. America, Europe, Asia. It all collapsed in a matter of weeks. People fled, tried to hide in the ruins, in the subway, in bunkers. They hid in the mountains, in the wilderness, hoping that the swarm would not find them. But insects have been searching for prey all their lives. They could smell fear, sweat, and blood. They found people wherever they hid. But there was one place they couldn't reach. Cold, frost, north, where the air became heavy, where the temperature dropped below -30, where even in the summer months ice storms tore the skin from the bones. The swarm was weak there. They slowed down. Their chitin became covered with frost. They froze like dead statues. It was the only chance for salvation. The North accepted us as it accepted my mother. She fled with those who were still alive, through devastated cities, through icy deserts, through the ashes of what had once been humanity. I was born on the day of the fall of Hades. I've never seen trees except in faded photographs. I do not know the smell of grass. I have not heard a bird sing. The cold wind was my cradle. My toys were empty shell casings. And everything I know about the world before Roy, I know from my mother's stories. Now the South, the equator, and the tropics belong to them, huge carnivorous insects. Humanity no longer had power over these lands. Their wings rang in the hot air, and living clouds swirled, obscuring the sun. Their cities grew, intertwining with the remains of human megacities. Their nests tore through concrete. Their tunnels went deep for kilometers. The tropics became a giant hive, a living organism that grew, spreading itself further, moving like a tumor. But people still stayed there. At first, there were many of them, those who had managed to hide underground, in mines, in old shelters from the Cold War. For many years, the connection with them still existed. They were sending messages, dropping coordinates, requesting help. In the night, they talked about how they lived with crackling radio waves, that the sky no longer belongs to man, that every trip to the surface is a deadly risk, that they can hear the larvae swarming underground and the first wriggling tendrils breaking through the concrete from the walls of the bunkers, that they're holding on, but they don't know how long. And then there was silence. One by one, their signals disappeared. Maybe they were found. Maybe the satellites that were transmitting the signals are completely out of order. Maybe people themselves left their shelters, having lost hope. We never found out. Sometimes swarm particles reached our ice. Isolated individuals, random scouts, perhaps strayed from their packs. They flew, writhing in the air, with wings frozen in the icy wind, with predatory claws clicking greedily in search of prey. But the cold was dangerous for them. In hot climates, their bodies were an unstoppable machine. But here in the north, the frost bit into their chitin like red-hot needles. Their joints froze, the fluids in their bodies froze, and a few hours after the invasion, they simply fell to the snow, turning into fragile, icy statues. We collected their corpses, studied them, and sometimes even used parts of their bodies. Chitin was stronger than steel, and acid glands could serve as a means to process metal. There was still life here, among the ice. We didn't just survive, we adapted. Our farms grew under rocky soils, under ice, in hidden valleys. We ate hydroponic crops, fish from frozen lakes, and meat from animals we had managed to preserve. It was hard work, but it bore fruit. We didn't have enough comfort. We didn't have enough warmth, but we had enough food to keep us from starving. In the early years, we were weak and dependent on old stocks, but now we had our own industries, our own food, and our own life cycle. We weren't just hiding anymore. We were building a new civilization. But my mother said it was different in the beginning. She said that back then, No one knew how long the cold would last, whether it would be able to protect us, whether we would have the strength to survive. The first winters were the worst. Back then, there was still no clear organization. There were no greenhouses built. There were no fishing stations. People were scattered, disorganized, living in fear, killing for food, doing things they didn't want to remember. That's in the past now. But sometimes I catch the eyes of old people, those who saw the first years after the fall of Hades, those who remember this horror better than me. They don't talk about the past, but their eyes speak for them. They saw what happens when a person is left alone with hunger, cold, and hopelessness. They've seen how far we can go to survive. And if one day the cold disappears, if the swarm gets to us, I do not know which will be scarier, these creatures, or those who we will become if we manage to survive on the edge. Theoretically, terrible things can happen. I'm not a scientist, but sometimes I listen to the conversations of those who have remained from the old world, those who still remember technology, research, and theory. They say that the Insectoids, that's what we call the swarm representatives, can affect the atmosphere. In the early years, when they first appeared, the climate began to change. It took them a while to figure it out. It seemed to people that these were just the consequences of a catastrophe. Falling fragments of Hades, fires, dust emissions into the stratosphere, pollution of the oceans. But then we noticed that the sky was turning black, not only from their flocks. Something had changed in the very air. He became heavier, wetter. Abnormal storms began in the southern regions. The heat reached superhuman levels, and moisture evaporation accelerated. The rains turned acidic. People who managed to get out of the southern zones said that the air there seemed to be saturated with tiny particles of chitin, organics, something that defies normal description. It smells of rotting, old moss, and sweet decaying flesh. This is not just the destruction of nature. This is its adaptation to a new prevailing type. The Insectoids prepare the climate for themselves. They don't just take over the territory. They change it so that it suits them. They release pheromones into the air, substances that alter the balance of the atmosphere. Their nests vaporize ammonia, sulfur compounds, and chemical components into the air, which have never been present in the atmosphere in such monstrous concentrations. They change the composition of the soil, saturating it with their waste, turning it into a substrate suitable only for their species. The earth there doesn't smell like earth anymore. She smells like incubators, the insides of a huge organism that grows and devours everything around her. The old people say that once upon a time the earth has already experienced disasters, extinction of dinosaurs, ice ages, great floods. But these were natural processes. But the Insectoids are something that came from outside, not to coexist with the world, but to completely remake it. This is not just an invasion, not just an occupation. It's the plague. What happens if they manage to change the atmosphere to the end? If they can raise the average temperature, abolish winter, displace oxygen with their emissions, turn the tropics into one giant nest, then even our north will cease to be safe. Then the cold won't save us. Then perhaps we will find ourselves in a world where the air will be unsuitable for breathing, where the soil will not allow our crops to grow, where there will be no place for humans. Sometimes I wonder if that's how they've already destroyed other civilizations. Maybe our planet is not the first? What if the swarm is not an accident, not a biological malfunction, not just a species that evolved from insects to the possibility of space travel? What if it's a program, a self-replicating mechanism, an organic machine created once by someone for one purpose, to find planets, rebuild them, destroy unnecessary things, fill themselves? I don't know. No one knows. The scientists who are still left are arguing among themselves. Someone says that they act like ants, instinctively, without reason, just following the basic expansion program. Someone claims that someone controls them, that somewhere in their hives there is a higher intelligence, a leader, a real master. There have even been theories about gestalt fields and telepathy. Others say it doesn't matter, because reasonable or not, the outcome will be the same. The Insectoids don't leave us alone. Even here in the cold, we can't feel completely safe. I know they will come at some point. They'll find a way. They will adjust the climate. They will raise the oceans, dry up the land, and make the air unclean. They will make the land their own. They want it. They know we're here. I look up at the sky and wonder how much time we have left. The first entry in the diary of Ronald Macavara. I'm sitting in my room, if you can call it that. A metal container embedded in the frozen ground. It's narrow, cramped, and the walls are covered with a layer of condensation that freezes into tiny crystals in the morning. I have a cot with a blanket that still remembers the era when blankets were made not from synthetic rags, but from real fabric. A table with bent legs, an old lamp powered by a battery, and the book is a tattered collection of short stories by a long-dead writer. A paper book is a rarity. My mother found it and gave it to me for my 6th birthday, and then my mother died. Outside the window is a gray, bleak landscape. Ice, rocks, low sky. Here, in the depths of the Arctic, there are no trees, there is no grass, there is nothing that could remind you of the past world. There are only shelters cut out of stone, hangars, caves in which the last remnants of humanity hide. I see people gathering for the hydroponics service. Several people in heavy insulated overalls, their faces hidden behind masks, not from the cold, but from the humid air in the greenhouses. They carry tools, large containers with nutrient solution. Their work is more important than any other. Without them, we wouldn't have food. Hydroponics is life. Mutated, modified plant varieties grow under the ice, in specially dug greenhouses, on hanging racks. They do not require sunlight, and they feed only on solutions recycled from food scraps, dead animal bodies, and even waste, algae, fungi, and artificially grown protein crops. That's enough to keep me from starving. I have another task to do. I have to check the network. The network is our last defense. A giant metal wire structure strung around the settlement. It won't stop large flocks, but it can delay scouts, make them confused, linger, give us time to spot them, and destroy them with homemade flamethrowers. No one believes that she will help, but they hope for her. It is jokingly called a mosquito net. I pull on a heavy jumpsuit, zip it up, check the seams. Then I take a shotgun, a modified hunting weapon capable of firing explosive cartridges. It's useless against large insects, but if I encounter a scout or a small creature, I'll have a chance. It's cold outside. The wind drives the fine snow, twists it in swirls. Other fortifications are visible in the distance. Watchtowers, concrete barriers, old tanks abandoned after the last battles for Arctica. People fought among themselves here for tiny wastelands where they could start their lives all over again. But I was a kid then. The net is stretched between high supports, each of which is driven into the ice and rock for several meters. The wire is thick and sturdy, and old cans hang on it. When the wind blows, they rattle, creating the illusion that the net is alive. I start my rounds, inspect the fasteners. Everything is in place. But something is bothering me. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe something else. For some time, nuclear icebreakers were still sailing along the fairways, breaking through solid ice, as long as they had adequate crews, and there were no problems with the reactors. It was one of the last symbols of the old world, heavy, bulky ships created back in the era when man was the master of the planet and could afford to split the icebound ocean to make his way. They once served great purposes, delivering cargo, escorting ships, and rescuing expeditions. Then they became just floating fortresses where the survivors huddled, hoping that the cold and the sea would protect them from the swarm. But no one could stay at sea forever. Our group captured one such ship, We weren't the first to try to get to him. There were others before us. There was nothing in this world that could be called nobodies. If the engine was left somewhere, if the equipment was still working somewhere, it means that there was already a struggle for it. No one gave away resources for nothing. Either you take it away, or you're left with nothing. I was about 5 years old at the time, that is, 25 years ago. I can't say that I remember that day well. At that age, memory stores not events, but fragments, sounds, smells, and images. But there are things that stick in the mind forever. I remember that the adults talked about the ship with greed and hope. He stood by the frozen shore, covered with a layer of snow and frost, like a huge dead beast. Once it was the pride of the fleet. Now it's just an ownerless hulk, in the belly of which treasures could be hidden. I remember the things that were brought from there: crates of food, tools, clothes. For me, a 5-year-old child, it was just prey, something new that appeared in our world. I didn't realize then that every can of canned food could mean another month of life. Every pair of boots could mean feet saved from frostbite. But what I remember clearly is how 40 people went to the ship, and 20 or a little more returned. I remember the faces of those who returned. Not joyful, not victorious. Strangers, detached. I didn't know what kind of expression it was at the time. It appeared on people's faces later, when everything around me got worse. It was the look of a man who had seen what happens when one piece of bread costs a life. We were never told what happened on the ship. They only said that there were people there. They said they weren't God's lambs at all, but those sons of bitches. Those who hid in enclosed spaces for so long could not remain human in the usual sense of the word. Maybe there were those who wanted to protect their last resting place, or maybe those who turned the ship into a den of terror, obeying hunger and instincts. Old people say that the first blow is always struck by the one who is afraid of losing. I do not know which of them did it first, but 40 went on board, and 20 got off, and no one else remembered how it all happened. But that's not even the most important thing. Among those who returned were captured engineers, people who knew how heat, energy, and technology worked. They, who somehow miraculously survived, somehow ended up with us, were able to do what seemed impossible at the time: dismantle the heating boilers from the icebreaker and adapt them to our needs. I do not know exactly how they did it. It didn't matter to me then. What was important was that for the first time in many years, we had real heat and fuel from an icebreaker. Paradoxically, the nuclear icebreaker had bottomless reserves of diesel fuel. I remember that day. I remember how the people, stern, taciturn, exhausted by the cold, suddenly began to speak louder and smile. I remember how they got together for the first time in a long time, not to carry out the dead, not to discuss how to protect themselves, but just to feel the warmth. It was like a celebration. But I remember that day, because in a world where every day could be the last, where every winter threatened final death, in a world where even the air is saturated with fear of the swarm, people felt alive again. Ronald, having finished his work, went to the canteens. In the settlement, food was taken in several shifts, and soon it was his turn. He knew that the menu would not change: a thick protein mass made from processed algae, artificial meat, bread made from watery flour. But even this diet was the result of a long-term struggle for survival. Not all settlements could afford even that. On the way, he saw an old man sitting on a concrete block. A few children gathered around him, thin, emaciated children. No sun, no vitamins, no heat. Their faces seemed almost transparent in the cold lamplight, and many of their hair was too light, faded from lack of proper food. They lived in a world where childhood was not childhood, where games meant assembling and disassembling weapons, and fairy tales told not about magic and wonder, but about how the world used to be. The old man's voice rasped, and his breath steamed in the icy air. He talked about what he remembered. They were bursting right out of the ground, he said, not looking at the children, as if he saw something else in front of him, far away, long gone. In millions of packs. They didn't come from the sky, no. They were waiting. They waited inside, like parasites in the body. The earth opened up, and a swarm gushed out from under its bark. He paused, raised a piece of frosted fur stretched over the collar of his jacket to his lips, and continued. At first we thought it was just an attack. Well, the critters flew in. Well, they threw the eggs. Well, let's burn them or kill them like cockroaches in a house. But that wasn't the case. They didn't just breed. They knew where to hit. They attacked us methodically, without emotion, destroying us like a knife cutting through flesh. They were extinguishing power plants. They were smashing up warehouses. They didn't just kill people. They took civilization apart. He turned to the children, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. I was the guide, the captain of the ship on the northern route. We were coming from Klaipeda. You don't even know where it is, you little brats. The old man smiled bitterly. I steered the ship through the splitting ice, carrying people when it seemed to us that the North could save us. We reached the very edge, to the abandoned climate base. It became the first settlement. We were lucky that there were old stocks there. We were lucky that the generators were still working. We were lucky that Roy couldn't follow us. The children looked at him, some with their mouths open, others with narrowed eyes. Some believed, some just listened, some were already old enough to doubt. One species destroys another, the old man sighed. It's always been that way, and it's always going to be that way. But we're still here now. We coexist with them on the same planet, even though we have been squeezed out. The world has a future. Ronald looked at him, then at the children. They didn't have a past. They didn't see what the old man saw. They were born into this world, and for them, it was the only reality. The question was whether they would have something else. Ronald was looking thoughtfully at the snow when thoughts of the groups that once tried to return to the mainland came back to his mind. The second entry in Ronald's diary. It was a long time ago, but in places like this, time flowed differently. There were no days. There were no months in the usual sense. Just a change of work shifts, a change of seasons, when winter became a little milder, and then it killed with cold again. Two groups. Two detachments of people who decided that it was possible to return to the mainland, pass through the Russian Arctic, and further south. And what? Find something there? Find someone? Someone believed that people still lived there, that there were those who had taken refuge deeper, survived the disaster, and managed to adapt. Someone thought that if we survived, then others could have survived. The first group left 3 years ago. People equipped them as best they could. They took weapons, supplies, and fuel with them. They chose the most difficult route, through Chukotka, further along the coast, towards Magadan. No one knew exactly why they chose this particular route. Maybe they were hoping to find old military bases, shelters, warehouses that could still contain at least something useful. Maybe there was just no other option. Contact with them disappeared after 3 months. At first there were fragments of radio signals, heavy phrases breaking through the interference. We have reached the old station. Supplies are running low. We saw something. Then the signals became less frequent. And then the emptiness. The second group left a year ago. They had more experience. They took into account the mistakes of the first one. We walked more carefully, took less cargo, and counted on speed. Their route was different, through Yamal, further towards the Urals, to where once there was a powerful network of bunkers, strategic facilities, and industrial complexes. But there weren't even any signals from them. They just disappeared. No one came back. They died. Maybe they're frozen. The cold is a ruthless killer. It doesn't give you a second chance. If you run out of fuel, If your warm clothes break, death will come quickly. Maybe the swarm had caught up with them. The Insectoids don't live in the north, but that doesn't mean they don't try to get there. Sometimes they send scouts. Sometimes small colonies move further than before. They don't build hives in permafrost, but who says they can't do that? They're learning. They're adapting.
Maybe the groups found something on the mainland, something scary, something they couldn't handle.
The Insectoids don't just kill. They don't just eat. They change everything around them. There was nothing human left in the southern regions. Where cities used to be, chitinous structures now stand, intertwined, pulsating, growing. They grow like living tissue, like cancerous tumors, covering the ruins of civilization. They squeeze glass out of windows, tighten asphalt, replace concrete with their living substances. They say that there is not a single street or building left in the former Moscow. There are only twisting walls made of chitin and organic matter, giant columns reaching into the sky, echoing voids from where endless grinding, movement, and rustling can be heard. It is said that in Dubai, insectoids have completely adapted to the sand, that there is no longer a single free piece of desert there, only swarming masses, swirling, seething, alive, scurrying in endless labor, laying eggs, building, developing. They say that there is no Sahara in Africa now, just a huge beehive array interconnected by tunnels in which a creepy alien life swarms. But no one knows for sure, because no one is coming back. Just as those who left across the Arctic did not return. And Ronald did not know which was worse, to imagine their death quickly or to think that they had reached it. But they saw something that was worse than death itself. The Northern Urals. Expedition 2. Survivor. The man was sitting in the depths of a military bunker, wrapped in an old army peacoat, when the faint hum of a generator filled the cramped space. The lights flickered dimly, the instrument panels lit up, and he quickly checked the voltage, enough for a few more hours of work. Fuel was saved and used only for critical needs, heating, water treatment, and battery recharging, and for an important ritual. Every day, at the same time, he went on the air. He turned on the radio, checked the frequency. Static crackling, distant rumble, emptiness. The broadcast remained unresponsive, but he continued anyway, because someone could be listening. This is the bunker Vimpel 13, survivor, a member of the expedition, the Polar Urals, or the Northern Urals, I don't know for sure. The coordinates are lost. The starting point of the route is Greenland, the base of survivors. He swallowed hard, and his fingers tightened on the microphone. I was left alone. I repeat, I am alone. Everyone is dead. Supplies are running low. His voice was trembling, and his breathing was labored, as if he were holding back a tantrum with the last of his strength. I do not know what happened. We got to the Urals. We were looking for bunkers, shelters. We thought we could find people, find warehouses. We found something, but we did not find salvation. He paused, inhaled, exhaled. There are insects here. Not as many as in the south, but they are there. Small colonies. They build their damn nests right in the frozen ground, in cracks, in the ruins of old mines. They are small, they are few, but they are already here, and they fly. He paused, swallowed, as if replaying what he had seen in his head. They look like beetles, but with leathery wings, like bats. The size is like an average dog, maybe more. 2 wings, but the main thrust comes from the muscular mechanism inside the chest. Chitin is covered with fine hairs. It seems to vibrate when they fly. They squeak hideously, this sound. It hurts the ears, like ultrasound. It's impossible to get used to. He squeezed his eyes shut, remembering. At first we thought they were dead. We were walking along an old road, and we found an abandoned hangar. Inside the body, Insectoids, motionless, as if frozen. And then, one of us decided to check it out. He got too close. There was a heavy, ragged intake of breath over the speakers. They weren't dead. They're sleeping. They go into suspended animation, like insects, like damn wasps that burrow into the ground. They're waiting for it to get warmer. But if you disturb them... The broadcast went silent for a few seconds, as if he was trying to collect his thoughts. They attacked instantly, quickly. They bit into the neck, into the eyes, under the ribs. He screamed, but no one could do anything. Blood gushed out like a fountain, and they just tore him apart while he was still alive. Desperation rang in his voice. We tried to run, but they move in the air like predators. They fly like lightning. They don't just flutter, they hunt. They come to a distance, wait, and watch. At some point, one of them just dived down. The claws entered right into the face of our commander. God! He coughed as if he was vomiting. I hid in the bunker. They couldn't break through, but I heard them. They're all around. They're not stupid. They're not just creatures acting on instinct. They understand that I'm here, and they're waiting. For a few seconds, only his heavy, ragged breath was heard. They migrate in winter. They go south, towards the equator. There are packs of them. There are hives of them. But some remain. They burrow, hibernate, and hide in crevices. But they don't die. They are waiting for spring. They'll come out as soon as they feel warm. The radio crackled, and the voice became quieter, almost dropping to a whisper. If you hear that, don't go to the mainland. Don't go to the mainland. This is their land. We can't bring her back. Static crackles. I'll try to hold on. I'll be on the air every day. If anyone can hear, please. The radio went silent. Only the noise of the airwaves and the hum of the generator remained in the silence of the bunker. The radio came to life with a hiss of static, and then a voice rang out, hoarse, tired, but still alive. This is the bunker Vimpel 13, the second broadcast. I'm a member of the expedition. Once there were 7 of us. Now I'm alone. He paused and switched to reception, as if hoping that someone would answer. But there was only the crackle of the ether in response. I'll tell you their names. Maybe it won't change anything. Maybe no one will remember them. But if I don't tell you, it means they never existed. He sighed heavily. Philip Vincent, the officer, soldier. He believed that discipline was the key to survival. I always made sure that the weapons were in order, that the camp was protected. He said that if you keep things in order, then everything will be fine. It didn't help. The Insectoids tore it apart by the river, just surfaced from the water as if they were waiting. We didn't even have time to aim. Yuri Lemeshev, a scientist, old, dry, strict. He believed that we would find bases in the Urals, that there were shelters where people could escape. He was looking for maps, calculating routes. He hadn't calculated the weather. I got lost in a snowstorm. When they found him, he was huddled against a rock, as if he had just fallen asleep. Daniel Okada, engineer. I was always tinkering with the generator, with the walkie-talkie, with the equipment. He said that the world can be fixed if you don't give up trying. He was killed quickly, in an old hangar full of rusty cars. We thought we could hide there, but the insects have already made it their nest. They were hiding under a layer of debris, under rubble, and when Daniel stepped forward, they came out. Samuel Thorne, silent, attentive. He was the first to notice that the insects here were different from those in the south. They are smaller and faster here. We saw them when we crossed the old mine. They hung from the ceiling like bats covered in frost. We thought they were dead. They weren't dead. Thorne stared at them the longest. Then he just raised the gun and shot himself in the head. Christophe Loiseau, doctor. He kept us in order, gave us strength, treated us as best he could. When he broke his leg, he asked me to leave him. We refused. Then he asked for a revolver. I gave it to you. He said, "It's better than being their grub." I understand what he meant. Adam Schreiber. He knew we were all going to die. He's been talking about it since the beginning. He said there was no hope, that this world is no longer for us. We were hoping for a miracle, but he was right. And me, Jack Rains, the last of the expedition, survivor. I don't know why. He paused, trying not to get lost in his own thoughts, then spoke again. The ocean is poisoned. No one knows what. No one can explain it. The water stinks like rot, like tainted flesh. Even if it is cleaned, even if it is passed through filters, through desalination plants, it still kills. We saw it. A burning sensation begins in the stomach, then convulsions, then the insides burst from the inside. We found an old laboratory near the shore. There were barrels, capsules. They were opened. People who worked there, they died terribly. Their bodies were bloated, as if they were trying to spit out their own organs. He ran his hand over his face as he continued to speak. Fresh water is available only in the rains, in the rivers that flow to the seas, in the lakes, of which there are few left. The rest of the water belongs to them. He was silent again, this time for a longer time. His breathing could be heard over the speakers. If no one answers within a week, I'll kill myself. The radio crackled, and then silence fell again. Geostationary station, Star Eagle, Earth orbit. A century ago, people dreamed that orbit would become their second home, that stations and spaceships would provide a path to the stars. But the Star Eagle was not a gateway to the future, but a grave hovering over a dying planet. A joint project of the United States, China, and the Russian aerospace forces, the Eagle was the pinnacle of engineering, a huge platform created to control the Earth's surface and coordinate space missions. It was powered by massive solar panels, supplied with backup fuel cells, and used a regenerative life support system. The water was recycled in a closed circuit, passing through layers of filtration and electrolysis. Oxygen was produced by a water separation system and stored in tanks. Carbon dioxide was processed by co-sorption modules and converted into oxygen and fuel. Even the waste was incinerated in special chambers, and their ashes were used as an additional source of mineral compounds for plant nutrition in the experimental agricultural sector. The systems were working properly, only there were no more people on board. Crew, 8 people. Alive, 0. They saw the swarm fall. They recorded data, intercepted signals of despair, listened to the earth scream, as a man screams before death. They watched as cities disappeared, as skyscrapers turned into broken remains, as the blue color disappeared in the oceans, as everything that was humanity shrank, crawled away into cold lands, into a corner from which there was no escape. Someone hoped that the orbital station would become a shelter. There were supplies, technology, and air here. But there was also fear, panic. After all, people have done what they do best. They killed each other. At first, they were just arguing about what to do next, whether it made sense to wait for help, whether it was worth sending the shuttle to Earth or, conversely, trying to get further away, into outer space. Then the argument turned into loud screams, and the screams turned into panic attacks. No one would remember who started it first. A fist? A glass flask smashed over his head? Gouged eyes or a broken Adam's apple? Then the first shot of the pneumatic alarm system rang out. In a confined space where every breath depended on the filters, a single hole in the hull was enough to turn the ship into a burial ground. They didn't think. They just killed to avoid being killed. All this time, one person was outside. One of the engineers, Tang Xiao, was repairing the exterior cladding of the solar panel. He could hear himself breathing, voices coming from the helmet speaker, then screams, growls, moans, and sobs. He knew that something had happened, but he didn't have time to figure out what. It was not possible to return to the station. The automatic telemetry system failed. When the oxygen ran out, Tang Xiao did not scream. He just froze in the void, in silence, slowly turning into a frozen corpse that still floats near the station, slowly spinning in zero gravity. His body became another silent shadow among the dead cars that remained hanging above the ground. The Earth's atmosphere was changing optics. One of the most powerful observation systems on the station recorded how the Earth's atmosphere became different. As the swarm grew, the sky darkened. It was no longer blue. It was covered with thick, viscous clouds. Black-green vapors appeared in the air, dense, heavy, spiraling, rising from new hives, from cracks in the ground, from giant chitinous towers that grew instead of old cities. The oceans were turning black. Their surface was covered with a film similar to spilled engine oil. In some places, strange underwater movements were recorded, as if something colossal was moving in the depths.
And a swarm was spreading across the surface of the continents.
The onboard computer's automatic report, Neurosensor 350, Marshall. Recent observations. 1. North America, New York, Washington, Chicago have disappeared. Black swirling masses in which huge moving shadows are visible. 2. Europe. Lines like veins stretched from Paris to Moscow. In the center is a giant node where Berlin used to be. 3. Africa. From Morocco to South Africa, biomass. A new landscape covered with writhing bodies. 4. Asia. Part of the Himalayas is fractured. Dark liquid seeps out from inside in giant streams.
5. Oceans. Something is moving under the water. Something is growing in the depths.
The station drifted in silence. The systems were working. Sensors recorded the data. The optics transmitted images. But there was no one to watch them. There was no one to analyze them. The Star Eagle hovered over the dying world, turning into a mechanical crypt, one of the many dead ships that will remain hanging above the Earth when there are no more people on it.